Live NFL trivia every Tuesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge and have a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. When a player gets drafted, 99.9% of the time, it's a fairly straightforward process. The team calls up the player in question, tells the player that they're drafting him, the player talks with the front office for a bit, and that's the end of it. Occasionally you'll have a bizarre moment, like a player who was sleeping when he got picked and had no idea he was drafted until he woke up, or a player who was away for a bit and the team has talked to someone else close to him, but for the most part, that's how these operations go. At the very least, even with those aforementioned strange moments, you at least know where the player is at, and know that he's alive and well. I bring that up because there was one year where this was not the case. And we're not talking about an 11th round pick here that had an uphill climb to make the roster anyways. We're talking about the 3rd overall pick in the NFL draft. In 1976, the New Orleans Saints spent a draft pick on a player that was completely M.I.A. Nobody had heard from him beforehand, nobody heard from him during the draft, and it got so chaotic that a search was on to find him. Of all the stories in the infamous Saints era, this ranks near the top. And this is the story of the strangest draft incident in Saints history. Before I talk about the pick in question, we need some context as to how the Saints were looking as they were heading into the draft, the player, and why they were thinking about drafting that player in the first place. In 1975, no one had any real expectations for the Saints. The Los Angeles Rams were the kings of the NFC West. The Saints had never had a winning record in franchise history, and had never finished the season with more than 5 wins. Nothing about the Saints, who had lost 5 of their final 7 to end the 1974 campaign, and had the 3rd worst offense in all of football that year, was threatening or screamed that they were going to make a playoff push. People thought that the 1975 season was going to be bad, but I'm not sure they realized just how bad it would get. Over the first 3 games, they went 0-3, scoring 10 points total in that stretch and turning it over 8 times. That's about as anemic as an offense can get. Head coach John North was fired after a 1-5 start, and things did not get much better with a new man in charge, as New Orleans finished that year with a 2-12 record. They had the 4th worst defense in football, and if that wasn't bad enough, they had the worst offense in all of football as well. Here's just a brief rundown of their ineptitude that season. They had 6 games where they were held to 7 points or less. They had 1 game against the Minnesota Vikings where they finished with 6 first downs, 60 total yards of offense, and -7 net passing yards. There was a lot that went wrong for New Orleans that season that I'd be here all day if I listed every single hole in the team. However, one of the more glaring holes was at running back, where the team finished 23rd out of 26 teams in rushing yards, 23rd in rushing touchdowns, and 25th in yards per carry. When you're in the bottom 4 of the league in the 3 major statistical rushing categories, that is a very bad sign. Fullback Alvin Maxson was the only player on the team with more than 2 rushing touchdowns, and he finished the season with 3. The Saints finished the season tied with the San Diego Chargers for the worst record in all of football, which in any other year is a really good thing, because it means you're picking 1st overall. Unfortunately for the Saints, because of the 2 expansion teams joining the league in 1976 and the Seattle Seahawks and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they had to settle for pick number 3. And with that 3rd pick, they knew they needed to address the glaring hole at running back. Who do they have in mind? Enter a man by the name of Chuck Muncie. When you ask people who the best offensive player in the history of Cal football is, odds are it will likely boil down to 1 of 2 names, especially for those who were around in the 1970s. You would hear some people banging the table for Steve Bartkowski, the quarterback who would eventually become the 1st overall pick in the 1975 NFL Draft by the Atlanta Falcons. The other one would be this man right here, a running back by the name of Chuck Muncie. He was an absolute beast in college, and was considered to be the best running back in college football by many people. If Archie Griffin was the best, then Muncie was running right behind him at that 2nd spot. In Muncie's first season in 1973, he averaged over 5 yards per carry while scoring 12 touchdowns in 11 games and racking up over 1,000 yards from scrimmage. After finishing 3rd in the Pac-8 in rushing touchdowns, he followed that up in 1974 by once again finishing 3rd in the conference in that category, while scoring 11 touchdowns and picking up over 1,200 yards from scrimmage. But in 1975, Muncie would become a household name that college football fans across the country could not ignore. He averaged over 6.4 yards per carry, racked up over 1,800 yards from scrimmage, and scored 15 touchdowns, leading the Pac-8 in points scored and finishing 4th in the entire NCAA in rushing touchdowns. While Archie Griffin won the Heisman for the 2nd straight season, when it came to rushing yards, receiving yards, yards per carry, receptions, yards per touch, rushing touchdowns, receiving touchdowns, and total touchdowns, Muncie had him beat in every single category. If Muncie's draft stock wasn't through the roof already, after that 1975 season, it skyrocketed. In fact, from New Orleans' perspective, it may have skyrocketed too much. Not many people thought that Muncie would slide to the Saints at number 3 overall. Defensive end Leroy Selman going 1st overall to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers was a given. Head coach John M.I.A said that the team was taking a defensive lineman. and emphatically stated before the draft, "We will not trade our number 1 pick away. No way." And conventional wisdom had the Seahawks taking Muncie 2nd overall. In every newspaper article I could find previewing the draft, every single one of them had Muncie going 2nd, leaving New Orleans to take Oklahoma running back Joe Washington 3rd overall. But as we all know, the draft has a way of throwing curveballs every now and then. And while there was nothing shocking about what the Buccaneers did, as they stuck to the game plan and took Selman 1st overall, the Seahawks took Notre Dame defensive tackle Steve Niehaus 2nd. Because of this unexpected pick that didn't work out at all for Seattle in the end, as Niehaus only played 3 seasons with the team and recorded no sacks in his final 2 years there, the Saints were able to get their man. They were in awe that Chuck Muncie fell to them. With that, they called up Muncie, and they got nothing. Because as it turns out, Muncie was M.I.A. Now before we go any further, you might have flashbacks to a previous video of mine where I talked about a similar scenario that happened at the 1994 NFL Draft. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But in short, the Giants drafted Indiana wide receiver Thomas Lewis, and he didn't answer because he was asleep. And then, the Chiefs followed it up by drafting Texas A&M running back Greg Hill, and he didn't answer because the Chiefs had the wrong number. However, eventually, both the Giants and Chiefs got in contact with their respective players after the fact. It's a funny story, but that's not at all what I mean when I say that Muncie was M.I.A. This wasn't some misunderstanding or anything like that. He literally was M.I.A. Prior to the NFL Draft, he was in hiding. While some speculated that he was at the home of his agent, Mike Trope, nobody really knew where he was. The last anyone even heard from him was 2 weeks before the draft, when newly appointed Saints head coach Hank Stram got in contact with him. After that, absolutely nothing. Prior to the draft, the Los Angeles Rams, who were looking to add to an already strong backfield featuring Pro Bowler Lawrence McCutcheon, tried contacting Muncie, because they wanted to gauge his interest levels in possibly staying in California and playing for the Rams. And the Rams literally could not get a hold of him. He had gone off the grid. The Saints used up all 15 minutes on the draft clock for a selection that should have taken 60 seconds, simply because they spent the whole time trying to get a hold of him and got nothing. After the pick was made, while the Saints were thrilled, with a general consensus around the organization being disbelief that he actually fell to them, Harry Holmes, the director of player personnel for the team, expressed some concern, saying, "We still haven't managed to talk to him." And things got so bad and so ugly that Mike White, the football coach of California, said that he would try and track down Muncie. You had a search party of sorts trying to figure out just where the heck Muncie was, which is always a great start to a career. Now the good news was that Muncie was found. As for why he went into hiding, we have no idea. I don't know why there was never a follow-up anywhere to this, but one possible explanation comes from a quote he had prior to the East-West game, where he said he felt nervous, and said there must be 100 agents lurking around. And what might be even more surprising is that the Saints were awfully quick to treat this incident as water under the bridge, as once they found him, they immediately signed him to a 7-year deal worth $1 million, in a negotiation process so smooth that it only took 2 hours to complete. Especially considering the circumstances, that was unheard of back in the day. Muncie's career was already off to a rather bizarre start. How did it end up? Well, it depends on who you ask. The story of Chuck Muncie is an incredibly complicated one. On one hand, he was an insanely talented football player. He ended his career as a 3-time Pro Bowler and was one of the top backs in all of football. He led the NFL in rushing touchdowns in 1981 when he recorded 19, which was tied for the NFL record at the time. He had 5 seasons with over 1,000 yards from scrimmage, and when he was healthy and on his game, was one of the toughest backs to stop in all of football. Many believe that he had the talent to be a Hall of Famer, and eventually be enshrined in the great halls of canon. On the other hand, he could not keep himself out of trouble. Unfortunately, I would be here all day if I listed everything he did in his decade in the league. And while he did turn his life around after an 18-month stint in prison in the late 80s for intending to sell cocaine, while he was playing, he could not stay out of his own way. He routinely missed practice and slept through meetings. He showed up late a couple of times. He was suspended by the NFL indefinitely for cocaine. He was traded out in New Orleans for being a pain to coach and for being an unreliable teammate. There is way too much to name here, but know that Muncie worked his way out of the NFL not because of what he did on the field, but because of what he did off of it. Unfortunately, you could say that the draft introduction, where he was completely M.I.A. and where people had to look for him just to figure out where he was, would be a pretty good indication of how his career turned out. He was an immensely talented player who just couldn't keep his head on straight, and his legacy could have been one of the all-time greats if he did just that. But when you think of how Muncie's career started and how the Saints drafted him, it's nothing short of bizarre. To draft a player who you have no clue where he is, and to essentially spend your first-round pick on a missing person? That just might be the strangest draft story in the over half-century-long history of the New Orleans Saints. Get your official Jaguar 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Monday and Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar9 and subscribe to 60-second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping with the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.